Chapter 1. The Noble and the Blade. The city of Altdorf seethed with life beneath a cold gray sky, its spires clawing upward like fingers begging the heavens for deliverance. The muddy waters of the Reik swirled around stone piers and crumbling docks, carrying barges heavy with cannon shot, wine casks, and the stench of unwashed flesh. Bell towers tolled across the morning mist, and the banners of noble houses flapped damply above the slate roofs, catching the breath of a sharp autumn wind that whispered secrets through the alleyways. In the heart of the city, the Reichsplatz arena stood like a jewel of violence and vanity, a great stone colosseum ringed with golden statues of Sigmar and the saints of war. Within, the air reeked of sweat, wet steel, horse piss, and roasted boar. Nobles in silk and ermine filled the high seats, while merchants and guilders pressed into the lower rows, craning their necks to see the clash of blades. Drums rolled, trumpets flared, and beneath them the sand-strewn arena floor was already streaked with red. Lord Cedric von Halbrecht, heir to House Halbrecht of Reichland, stood in the shade of a tall archway, tightening the straps on his leather gauntlets. His armor was lacquered black with silver filigree, light, flexible, and designed for the dance of the duelist, not the crush of war. His golden blonde hair was tied back, his face sharp and youthful, though his eyes, blue as glacier melt, held the weight of recent campaigns against beastmen along the Drawald's edge. Beside him leaned Calen, taller, leaner, his raven-black hair falling loose over his shoulders. He wore no sigil, no house crest. His eyes, nearly violet in hue, were unreadable as he inspected his curved saber, running a cloth down its darkened steel with a methodical care that suggested either reverence or obsession. Where Cedric stood proud and visible, Calen seemed to melt into the stone behind him, as though the light refused to hold him. "You've been quiet all morning," Cedric muttered, casting a glance his way. "This city bores you already?" Calen didn't look up. "It stinks of piss and sanctimony." Cedric smirked. "Then it's truly the heart of the Empire." They shared a brief chuckle, but Calen's laughter didn't reach his eyes. Cedric frowned slightly. This distance, it had grown more noticeable in recent months. Calen no longer joined the revelries after battle. He spoke in riddles, vanished for days, and had taken to carving strange symbols into the leather of his scabbard. Cedric had ignored it, until now. The trumpet blared. A herald in golden plate stepped forward into the sunlit sand. "Noble sons of the Empire, today we welcome House Halbrecht heir, Cedric, Wolf of the Drawald, and his appointed challenger, the silent blade of the West, Calen of no house." A roar met the announcement. Cedric stepped forward into the arena. The sun hit him like a hammer, reflecting off his breastplate. Dust and blood mingled beneath his boots. Across from him, Calen stepped forward, unsmiling. Above, behind the royal boxes, two figures in deep violet cloaks stood in the shadow of a statue of Myrmidia. Neither clapped. Neither spoke. Their eyes, pale and lidless like milk-blind serpents, remained fixed on Calen. The duel began with a clash of steel that sent sparks skittering across the sand. Cedric's longsword moved in wide arcs, balanced, measured, a knight's precision. Calen, by contrast, was a storm of feints and flickers. His saber danced like a striking asp, probing Cedric's defenses, testing his rhythm. They circled, blades whistled. A shallow cut opened on Cedric's shoulder, another nicked Calen's cheek. Blood spattered the sand, steaming faintly in the morning chill. Cedric lunged, overextended. Calen twisted past the thrust and slammed his elbow into Cedric's ribs. The nobleman staggered. The crowd roared. Cedric grinned, despite the bruise forming under his armor. "You're getting bold," he hissed, circling again. Calen's voice was colder than winter steel. "You're getting slow." The next exchange was a blur. Cedric moved high, Kalen low. A boot kicked sand into Cedric's eyes. A pommel cracked against Kalen's temple. They broke apart, breathing heavily, blades red with blood. From the stands, the noble spectators laughed and cheered, tossing coins into the arena. But Cedric's focus narrowed. Something had changed. Kalen was pushing too hard. Not like a friend sparring, but like a wolf testing the throat of its prey. His strikes had purpose, practice, fury. And for the briefest of moments, Cedric saw it. A flicker of something alien behind Kalen's eyes, something ancient and cold and full of disdain. He staggered back, blade dipping. "Kalen!" Kalen froze. That mask of perfect calm cracked. He sheathed his saber with a fluid movement and turned toward the crowd. "I yield," he said softly, but his eyes never left the two hooded figures behind the statue. The crowd jeered, some booed, others laughed. Cedric stared after him, stunned, breath ragged in his chest. Blood dripped from his arm and his pride. Kalen left the arena without another word. Far above, beneath the statue of Myrmidia, one of the violet-cloaked watches turned to the other. "The time is nearing," he rasped in Eltherin, the tongue of the Druchii. "He grows soft." The other nodded. "Then he must be reminded of the pain of mercy." They slipped away from the light like shadows devoured by a deeper dark. Cedric, alone in the arena, looked up into the crowd and saw no friend. Only strangers. Only ghosts. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Wood. The Drawald forest was ancient before the Empire was born. Its twisted boughs clawed at the gray skies like the fingers of starving corpses, and its roots pulsed with rot and secrets. Even the bravest soldiers of Reikland carried charms of Sigmar when passing through its shadowed trails, and spoke prayers between clenched teeth, for here the trees whispered in dead languages, and the wind carried the scent of old blood. The mist was thick that morning, dense, low, and clinging to the underbrush like breath upon glass. Horses snorted and shifted nervously, hooves muffled in the mulch of damp leaves and soft mud. Birds did not sing. No fox barked. Even the insects were silent. Lord Cedric von Halbrecht rode at the front of the patrol, helm resting upon his saddle, his chainmail darkened by dew. Behind him, 6 of his father's finest men, at arms, followed in a cautious column, swords sheathed, eyes scanning the undergrowth with anxious fervor. Kalen rode to his right, silent as ever, hood pulled low over his face. His cloak blended near perfectly with the undergrowth, and even his horse seemed unnerved by how lightly he moved, as if the man and beast shared some unspoken understanding. His gloved hand rested on the hilt of his saber, but his gaze never left the tree line. Cedric broke the silence. "This is too far west for beastmen." Kalen didn't reply immediately. When he did, his voice was soft, almost reverent. "This isn't the work of beasts." They had followed smoke trails from the village of Oberlenz, nestled deep in a glade that was barely more than a handful of homes and a shrine to Tal. It was the kind of place that didn't exist on maps, a half-day's ride from any paved road, isolated, vulnerable. As they crested the ridge, the village came into view, and silence fell like a hammer. What remained of Oberlenz was little more than blackened stumps and charred bones. Smoke curled from the husks of homes, but there was no fire, no cries, no movement, no survivors. The patrol halted. One of the men, a grizzled veteran named Router, made the sign of the twin-tailed comet. "Sigmar protect us." Cedric dismounted. Sword drawn, he moved forward on foot, stepping around scorched wood and shattered pottery. The smell was suffocating, a sickly blend of burned meat, iron, and human waste. Then he saw them. Bodies. Dozens of them. nailed to trees, crucified in mockery of imperial martyrdom. Men, women, and children, all stripped of skin. Their flayed hides were stretched on frames made of ribs and saplings, stitched with black thread into intricate runes. Some were still twitching, not from life but from the maggots. Cedric gagged, bile rising in his throat. One of the soldiers dropped to his knees and vomited. Aelin, by contrast, knelt beside one of the corpses, his expression unreadable. He examined the sigils carved into the bark beneath the corpse's feet, slashing, angular symbols like wounds that never closed. He stood and spoke with unnatural calm. "This is no beastman ritual. They don't have the precision." Cedric looked at him, eyes wide. "You know this script?" "I've seen it before," Kaelin lied smoothly. "In a tome confiscated by the colleges of magic. It's Eltarin, the tongue of the elves." Cedric's face darkened. "A Shrey wouldn't do this." "No," Kaelin agreed, voice lower now. "But the Drugi would." They spread out, searching for tracks or signs of where the attackers had come from. The surrounding trees bore more signs, bloodied handprints, gouges in the bark, and black feathers soaked in ichor. A mutilated dog's body had been arranged atop the shrine of Drawald, its eyes plucked out and its mouth filled with tiny bones, not its own. Router called Cedric over to a pit behind the village's ruined tavern. Inside it lay a pile of bodies, more than 24. Most were headless. Their heads had been mounted on spikes nearby, mouths stretched open and eyes sewn shut. "We didn't hear a thing," Router whispered. "These people never had a chance." Cedric crouched near the edge of the pit. "It wasn't a raid," he murmured. "It was a message." From the shadows of a half-collapsed stable, Kaelin stood perfectly still, his hand clenched around a piece of flayed skin. On it, burned into the flesh with acid, was a symbol he knew all too well, the sigil of Valkar Nightsong, his master. So, the others were here, operating in the Empire. The slaughter wasn't just chaos, it was calculated, purposeful, and Kaelin hadn't been warned. He dropped the flash and turned before Cedric could see. "They headed west," he said quickly. "Tracks are light, but I count 6 riders, hooves shod in silver." Cedric followed the direction Kaelin indicated, his jaw tight. "Then we follow." Router stepped forward. "My lord? If these are truly Drugi and not just a band of cultists, we should send for reinforcements." Cedric's knuckles whitened on his sword. "And let them vanish into the woods? No. We ride. Whatever did this, we end them." Kaelin didn't speak, but a flicker of something. Regret? Amusement passed through his eyes. They mounted again. The horses resisted, ears pinned, eyes rolling. The wind shifted, and somewhere, deep in the forest, something screamed. It was not man, nor beast, nor elf, but it sounded hungry. The patrol vanished into the trees, the mist swallowing their trail behind them. The flayed dead watched with eyeless sockets, their skinless mouths locked in eternal, silent screams. Chapter 3. The Witch Hunter's Eye. The wind had shifted by the time they returned to Altdorf. It blew sharp from the north, stinking of ice and chimney soot, as if the city itself was bracing against some unspeakable cold. Autumn had fallen away in a matter of days, replaced with a chill that clung to the cobblestones and coiled in the lungs like frostbite waiting to hatch. Lord Cedric von Halbrecht rode through the outer gates under escort, his horse's hooves slick with dried blood and half-frozen mud from the Drawald. He was still spattered in filth and ash, with bits of leaf and bone caught in the seams of his armor. Behind him, the remnants of his patrol rode in silence, eyes downcast. Even Kaelin, who was usually so unnervingly calm, looked distant, his face taut, his lips pressed into a pale, grim line. They hadn't found the raiders. The trail vanished 2 leagues west of Oberlentz, swallowed by the shifting paths of the forest and the heavy rains that followed. But what they had found, that was enough to stir nightmares for years. As the gates shut behind them and the chaos of city life returned, vendors shouting, beggars coughing, drunken laughter wafting from taverns, Cedric felt a strange pressure in his chest, like something sacred had been violated and left behind in the woods. It was evening by the time they reached the Halbrecht estate, a sprawling Gothic manor of gray stone and black iron perched on the northern rise above the university district. Torches flared along the walls as Cedric dismounted, tossing the reins to a groom without a word. Servants bustled around him, bowing and offering hot cloths and mulled wine, but he waved them off. His mind was elsewhere. Halen had already vanished inside. The study smelled of oil, vellum, and the lingering bite of incense. The fire crackled low, casting tall shadows on the oaken panels. Cedric leaned over a map of Reikland, candlelight flickering over the dark rings under his eyes. He traced the Drawald's edge with a gauntleted finger, frowning deeply. "You're hunting ghosts," came a voice like gravel and gunpowder behind him. Cedric turned. Standing in the doorway was a tall man in black, his wide-brimmed hat casting a long shadow across his face. He wore a heavy leather coat reinforced with steel at the shoulders. A twin-tailed comet scorched into the chest. His belt bore a pair of pistols and a sheathed rapier. His gloves were stained with something dark that did not reflect light. Inquisitor Jorund Feierstahl, Witch Hunter, Templar of Sigmar, Judge, Executioner. "You ride into the Drawald with 8 men, Feierstahl said as he entered, each step echoing like a death sentence. "You return with 5, 3 lost, no prisoners, no culprits, just tales of flayed peasants and symbols carved in skin." He stepped closer, eyes like smoldering coal beneath the brim of his hat. "I smell heresy, Lord Halbrecht, and I smell it close." Cedric straightened. "If you mean the Dark Elves, then yes, something monstrous has moved into the Drawald. The college should—" "I'm not talking about what's in the forest," Feierstahl growled. "I'm talking about what's standing beside you." Cedric blinked. "Kalen?" "Kalen of no house," the witch hunter said mockingly. "Kalen, who appears out of the mist at your father's court 5 years ago. No noble ties, no papers. Speaks fluent Reichsspiel, but with traces of dialect no scholar can place. Has a talent for blades and an uncanny way of knowing things he shouldn't." Aye. Cedric's jaw clenched. "He saved my life, more times than I can count, and perhaps delayed taking it for reasons of his own," Feierstahl said coldly. He removed a scroll from his coat and unfurled it on the desk. 2 months ago, a letter intercepted from a smuggler's guild operating out of Nuln mentioned an agent, tall, pale, eyes like ice, collecting artifacts marked with Druki runes, paid in gems not minted by any human nation. Described as silent as shadow, strikes like a whisper, vanishes like a ghost. He tapped the parchment with a thick, scarred finger. "Sound familiar?" Cedric's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword. Feierstahl didn't flinch. "He disappeared for 3 nights during your patrol on the Averlan border. You never reported it. Why?" "I didn't think it was. Didn't think, or didn't want to know." Silence hung heavy between them. Cedric stared at the dancing fire, jaw grinding. The memories came unbidden. Kalen slipping away into the trees without a word, returning hours later with blood on his gloves and no explanation. The scars across his back that didn't match any imperial battle style. The way animals avoided him. How even light wizards gave him uneasy glances. "Is my friend," Cedric said quietly. Feierstahl stepped closer. "He's a spy, maybe worse. He may have led you into that massacre to erase the evidence of some deal gone wrong." No. The denial came fast, sharp, but lacked certainty. He fought beside me. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. So did Manfred von Carstein once, and we all know how that ended. He reached into his coat once more and produced a small iron icon, the symbol of Sigmar's flame, etched in silver. You have until tomorrow morning to turn him over for questioning. If you don't, I'll assume your house is compromised and act accordingly. Cedric's voice dropped to a dangerous low. That's a threat. That's the law, Feuerstahl said, turning to leave. Don't let loyalty blind you to truth, Lord Halbrecht. Sigmar's light burns away all lies, even those wrapped in friendship. As the door closed behind him, Cedric stood frozen. Outside, thunder rumbled over the rooftops of Altdorf. Rain began to fall, tapping against the tall windows like skeletal fingers. Somewhere deep within the estate, Kalen sat in a dim corridor, listening, watching. And for the first time in years, he began to wonder if his time among men was nearing its end. Chapter 4. Shadows at Court. The grand solar hall of Altdorf was a cathedral to vanity, a fortress of velvet and powdered lies. Its vast domed ceiling shimmered with magical illumination that mimicked the constellations, constantly shifting in silent, elegant arcs above the heads of the empire's most powerful. Pillars of golden marble rose like titans, carved with scenes of Sigmar's victories, some true, most embellished. Perfumed air hung thick with incense and wine, the laughter of courtiers a chime of deceit, clinking off silver goblets and sharpened smiles. Cedric von Halbrecht stood at the edge of the gathering, feeling the weight of his title like a man drowning in silk. His family's crest, a silver wolf upon red, was stitched onto the breast of his black doublet, his long cloak trimmed in fur. He looked every inch the noble knight, tall, groomed, sharp-jawed, and tired. But his eyes scanned the hall with the caution of a man walking a blade's edge. The court was a serpent pit tonight. Ambassadors from the southern provinces huddled in cloistered groups, whispering about grain shortages and tax revolts. A Templar of the Order of the Blazing Sun flirted openly with a sorceress from the Amethyst College, her eyes as dead as her magic. Servants moved between them like ghosts, carrying silver trays heavy with fruit, oysters, and tiny stuffed doves, some still twitching from magical preservation. Every conversation was a duel, every glance a blade. And somewhere among these perfumed vultures were the spies, not just of rival provinces, but of darker allegiance. Cedric could feel it in the way shadows lingered a little too long behind pillars, in how certain diplomats blinked too infrequently, in how conversations stopped when he passed. He caught sight of Inquisitor Feuerstahl near the far end of the hall, standing like a jagged stone in a sea of lace. The witch hunter wasn't mingling. He watched, always watched, and Cedric felt his gaze like a branding iron between his shoulder blades. He needed Kalen. Elsewhere in the hall, Kalen had already vanished behind the velvet. He moved through servant corridors and blind hallways known only to those who did not belong. Cloaked in a plain black coat, his face half shrouded, he passed a kitchen filled with steaming copper pots and knife work, pausing only when a hooded boy brushed past him and slipped something into his palm. A note, tiny and crisp, bound with a single black thread. Kalen ducked into a shadowed alcove and unfolded it with gloved fingers. The script inside was in Druchii glyphs, written in coiling, elegant cuts. Your presence has been noted. You are reminded of your duty. Eliminate the false thorn, codename Fellmeyer. They have compromised the Hand's interest in Altdorf. Retrieve the ember sigil they carry. Deliver to the usual place. Disobedience will not be tolerated. V. Kalen folded the paper once, twice, and fed it to a nearby candelabra. It curled and blackened without smoke. Fellmeyer. He'd heard the name whispered in recent months, a rogue operative, once loyal to the Druchi network, now freelancing through the sewers and salons of the Empire. Too bold, too loud, and in possession of something powerful. The Ember Sigil, an ancient relic stolen from the ruins of Athel Tamail, said to burn through all magical illusion, revealing the soul behind the mask. Dangerous in the wrong hands, lethal in the right. Kalen slid a thin stiletto from the sheath hidden inside his left sleeve. The blade shimmered with a dark oil, venomous to any blood. He checked the balance, then vanished again into the veins of the court. Back in the main hall, Cedric sipped from a goblet of chilled mead, engaging in half-hearted conversation with a rotund baroness whose perfumes smelled like spoiled lilacs. He was smiling, but inside he was grinding his teeth. "Lord Halbrecht," came a voice like glass being dragged across bone. He turned. A man approached, tall, skeletal, wearing robes of deep violet etched with silver constellations. His face was hidden behind a half-mask, shaped like a sunburst, his eyes twin orbs of swirling gold. Magister Naren, one of the senior astromancers of the Celestial College. "A pleasure, Magister," Cedric said, bowing slightly. Neron tilted his head. "The pleasure is mine. I've seen interesting patterns surrounding you." Patterns? At a convergence of threats. Death, betrayal, fire, and a wolf whose eyes are not his own. Cedric narrowed his gaze. "You're not here for the party, are you?" "None of us are," Naren replied, and drifted away, like a dream unraveling. Cedric's fingers tightened around the goblet until the stem cracked. Kalen moved through the back halls like a thought unspoken. He found Fellmeyer in a forgotten side chamber just off the Hall of Saints, a room lined with statues of martyred generals and saints of war. Fellmeyer was leaning against one of the statues, tossing a coin in one hand. His eyes were too wide, his grin too full of teeth. He wore the robes of a Middenland priest, but his boots were wrong. Nagaroth steel, softened with ash. "You came," Fellmeyer purred. "I was beginning to think you were just a ghost story." Kalen didn't speak. "I know what you want," the rogue agent continued, pulling a small pouch from beneath his robes. Inside, nestled in black silk, was the Ember Sigil, a jagged red gem pulsing faintly like a beating heart. "But I don't think I'll give it to you." Kalen struck without warning. The stiletto flashed like lightning, but Fellmeyer was faster than he looked. He twisted, drawing twin curved daggers from under his sleeves. The blades met in a metallic shriek, sparks flying. Statues toppled as they moved, a flurry of knives and cloaks, dodging, slashing, feinting, twisting in the tight space. Fellmeyer slashed Kalen across the thigh. Kalen retaliated with a thrust that went under the ribs. Blood sprayed across a marble saint's face. The rogue shrieked, pulling away, his blade slashing open Kalen's side. But Kalen didn't falter. He disarmed Fellmeyer with a brutal wristlock, kicked him hard in the gut, and drove the poisoned stiletto into his throat, just beneath the jaw. Fellmeyer convulsed, eyes bulging, his mouth working soundlessly. Black ichor poured from his lips as his legs gave out. Kalen held him upright for a moment, eye to eye. "He chose the wrong side," he whispered. Then he let him fall. The Ember Sigil flickered faintly in the dead man's pouch. Kalen retrieved it, wiped his blade on the corpse's robes, and melted into the darkness. Back in the hall, Cedric caught sight of Kalen re-entering the main crowd. His friend's cloak was freshly dusted with gold thread. Clean, too clean, and his gait had a stiffness to it that suggested fresh injury. Cedric's smile faded. His fingers brushed the hilt of his sword. Feuerstahl still watched from the shadows. and above them the stars in the domed ceiling continued their slow, inevitable orbit, indifferent to the lies below. Chapter 5. The Betrayer's Blade. The noble district of Altdor slumbered beneath the weight of fog and frost. The moon, a pale sickle in a blood-washed sky, hung over the high stone mansions like a watchful eye, a god too old and tired to weep for the sins of men. Gilded windows shimmered with faint candlelight, whispering wealth and decadence, while the cobbled streets ran empty, slick with dew and shadow. It was the perfect night for a murder. Kalen crouched atop the slate roof of the Ludenhof estate, the cold biting into his knees through the leather of his trousers. He was little more than a shape wrapped in silence, his cloak blending seamlessly with the chimney stacks behind him. From his belt hung a pouch barely the size of a fist, inside of which pulsed the ember sigil, now dimmed but still warm, like a coal waiting to be stoked into flame. His target tonight was Lord Mattis Ludenhof, a minor noble with major indiscretions, officially a cousin to the Elector Count of Hochland, unofficially an information broker with a growing obsession for magical artifacts, one of which, Kalen's handlers had learned, was a sealed Drukei lexicon, an ancient tome containing espionage protocols from before the Sundering. His name, Kalen Drukei, was released to the general on the day before the massacre. His target tonight was Lord Mattis, who Deacon had seen his time traitor and soon imprisoned Behikala, an ancient tome containing all the secrets of the Globe Army. His target's fellow senators, for kingdom luck to ascendant, financial credentials, greater fortune, and ancient luck to us ascendant, personal reputation, and proxy to a linchpin in the domestic and foreign affairs. Valkar's orders had been explicit. Retrieve the lexicon, eliminate Mattis, make it silent, make it art. Kalen moved with unnatural grace, scaling down the side of the building with hooked gloves, slipping through a second staircase window like smoke. Inside the manor was a cathedral of indulgence, ivory busts of Kislevite queens, tapestries woven with silver thread, and paintings that depicted scenes of noble glory, most of which were live. He padded barefoot down the corridor, blades glinting faintly in each hand. The air smelled of lilacs and rot. Lord Mattis was in his study, hunched over a roll of parchment with a goblet of dark wine in one hand. His back was turned. He wore only a silken robe, oblivious to the death approaching him with every heartbeat. Kalen crossed the threshold silently, closing the door behind him. Mattis looked up only when the blade kissed the side of his neck. Guts. What? Kalen drove the dagger upward, sliding it beneath the jaw and into the soft palate. The noble choked on his own scream, gagging, legs kicking beneath the desk. Blood gurgled past his lips as Kalen pulled the blade free and plunged it again, this time between the ribs. Mattis collapsed onto the desk, twitching violently, his mouth frozen open in a silent plea. Awen did not blink. The lexicon was hidden in a false drawer beneath a cabinet. He found it within seconds, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with a red wax rune. He tucked it into a satchel and paused only long enough to wipe the blood from his hands. And that's when he heard it. A sound, soft, uncertain. A footstep in the hall. Kalen vanished into the servants' corridor behind the bookcase, just as the main door creaked open. Cedric stepped into the study, breath misting in the cold air. He wasn't sure why he was there. A tip had reached him anonymously, something about Lord Mattis meeting with a potential traitor, something about Drukei relics and how certain guests had begun to disappear from the nobleman's salons. It had sounded like drunken rumor, but after what he'd seen in the Drakewald and after Furistal's accusations, Cedric could no longer afford to ignore whispers. The scent of blood hit him instantly. It was rich, metallic, heavy. His eyes snapped to the desk, and there was Mattis, sprawled across the mahogany, his face a ruin of punctures and deep gashes. His throat had been opened wide, nearly severed. Blood soaked the documents beneath him. A final, trembling twitch escaped his fingers. Cedric drew his sword. The runes etched into its fuller pulsed faintly in response to nearby sorcery. He moved slowly, scanning the room. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no footprints on the plush red carpet. But the air still moved, ever so faintly, like the ghost of something that had never breathed. Cedric's gaze fell to the floor. A faint smear of blood led toward the back wall. He followed it, placing his gloved fingers against the wood grain. It took only a moment to find the hidden catch. A servant's passage. Empty. Whoever had done this was already gone. He stepped back into the study, eyes narrowing. There was something missing, he could feel it. The way Mattis's drawers had been disturbed. A gap between books on the shelf, recently filled. Something had been taken. And Kalen had vanished from the court gathering not 2 hours ago, reappeared shortly after, still limping. Cedric swallowed hard, the weight in his chest tightening. He wanted to dismiss the thought, bury it, but it clung to his ribs like a parasite. A sound behind him made him turn sharply, but it was only a maid, screaming as she glimpsed the body on the desk. Her cries echoed through the hall. Cedric stepped away from the corpse, the blade still slick in his hand, and vanished into the shadows before the guards arrived. That night, in the sanctuary of his chambers, Cedric lit a single candle and stared at the blood-spattered journal he had recovered from Mattis' desk. Names, dates, exchanges. And at the bottom of one page, scrawled in an ink different from the rest, perhaps recent, he saw the words, "The Shadow Wolf walks among us. I have seen the mark on his flesh. If the lexicon falls into his hands, all is lost." Cedric clenched his fists. Shadow Wolf. A name. A warning. A code? His thoughts churned. Could it be Kalen? The boy he'd bled with? Or had Cedric truly never known who walked beside him? He rose, stepping to the window. Far below, across the rooftops of Altdorf, a shape moved, graceful, silent, cloaked in the night. The betrayer's blade was already on its next path. Chapter 6. The Sigmarite's Warning. The candlelight guttered as a chill wind slithered under the study door. The fireplace hissed and popped, its embers casting warped shadows across the thick stone walls of the Halbrecht estate. Midnight had long since passed, yet Cedric von Halbrecht remained at his desk, hunched over a sheaf of parchment scrawled in tight, frantic ink. His sword lay unsheathed across the tabletop, its steel dulled by blood yet to be cleaned. The scene in Ludenhoff's study haunted him still, eyes wide, mouth frozen in agony, crimson staining the ink blots of 100 secrets. And the name in the journal, Shadow Wolf. A name that refused to leave his mind. His fingers trembled as he turned another page. There were references to meetings under false moons, to coded signals sent via carrion birds. Most were gibberish, noble paranoia and political theater, but 2 entries stood out. The operative walks in the guise of a man, but is not of man. His eyes reflect no soul, only the void. The knock on his door came like a hammer stroke. 3 times, measured, heavy. Cedric's fingers slipped to his sword. He crossed the room silently and pulled open the door. Inquisitor Feuerstahl stood there, hood drawn, coat slick with rain. Behind him the hallway torchlight flickered against his broad silhouette, casting his face in shadow, except for his eyes. Those burned like coals. Without a word, he entered. "You should be in chains," Cedric said coldly, shutting the door behind him. "You have no writ to come here." Feuerstahl turned to face him. "The writ of Sigmar does not beg parchment." He reached into his coat and withdrew a thick leather-bound tome, its cover marked with the Comet of Sigmar and reinforced with metal corners. Cedric recognized it. A witch hunter's ledger, the kind that recorded heresies, sorceries, and sins bound in blood. Feuerstahl set it down and flipped it open. Pages turned fast, revealing sketches, sigils, copied letters, and detailed accounts of magical corruption. He stopped at one. A charcoal sketch of a man's face, sharply angled, high cheekbones, long, raven dark hair, eyes drawn too wide, too empty. "Kalen." "What is this?" Cedric demanded. Feuerstahl's voice was low, but every word struck like a drumbeat. 14 years ago, a small imperial outpost near the border of the Sea of Claws was raided. Everyone was slaughtered, but one child was taken. We found his tracks later, carried through the mountains to the north. A year later, a similar-looking boy appeared in the streets of Marienburg. No memory, no name, only a taste for knives, languages he shouldn't know, and a tendency to disappear at night. Cedric frowned, refusing to look at the sketch again. "That proves nothing." Feuerstahl flipped another page. "He speaks fluent Eltern, not Asrite, Druki, not taught, ingrained, born." He opened a small case and withdrew a silver amulet engraved with runes. 2 weeks ago, I placed this charm in your estate, near his quarters. It detects shapeshifters, illusions, and daemons. When Kalen passed, the stone turned black. That only happens when confronted with one specific kind of magic, dark glamour, the kind used by the traders of Nagaroth. Cedric's face was pale. "You're lying." "I'm not," Feuerstahl said flatly. "But even if I were, would you be willing to gamble the safety of the Empire on a hunch, on friendship?" The witch hunter leaned forward. "Do you know what Druki spies do when they've outlived their usefulness? When they're discovered?" He drew a small iron dagger from his belt. Its blade was jagged, its edge permanently stained with dried black. "They don't flee, they kill. Everything, everyone. They don't care about survival, only about silence, secrecy, shadows." Cedric stepped back, his knuckles white. "You're asking me to believe that Kalen is—" "What? A sleeper agent?" he scoffed, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the crumbling certainty beneath. "I'm not asking," Feuerstahl replied. "I'm warning. The moment you stand in his way, he'll kill you too." Cedric shook his head slowly, as if trying to physically dislodge the thought. "He saved me. He's bled for me. He's never raised a hand against anyone who didn't deserve it." "Yet you found him in Ludenhoff's manor, didn't you?" Feuerstahl said, his voice suddenly like a scalpel. "Or rather, you found the aftermath, the body, the stolen relic, the blood, but no Kalen." Cedric's mouth opened, but no words came. Feuerstahl smiled grimly. "He's operating beyond your reach now. Your loyalty will only make you a liability. Bring him to me, or I'll take him by force." He turned to leave, stopping just at the door. "If you try to warn him, I'll know, and I won't stop at your name. Your house will fall with him." Then he was gone, vanishing into the corridor with the sound of booted steps and thunderous judgment. Cedric remained still for a long time. The fire had died. The wind rattled the windows like claws upon glass. He walked to his desk, hands trembling, and stared again at the drawing. The sketch of Kalen. No, not Kalen. Not the man he'd grown up with, not the brother he'd chosen, but the shadows in the sketch's eyes stared back at him. Mocking, familiar. He turned to the arched window and stared out over the rooftops of Altdorf. Somewhere, beyond the fog, Kalen moved, silent, elegant, deadly. And Cedric no longer knew whether he feared his friend's death, or feared what he'd do if the truth proved real. His hand fell to his sword, and for the first time he wasn't sure which way it would swing. Chapter 7. Into the Drawald. The Drawald loomed before them like a vast, breathing tomb. By morning's light, it was a wall of gnarled oaks and black pines, their trunks mottled with lichen and twisted into shapes that looked like the frozen writhings of the damned. Mist clung to the undergrowth, thick and bitter with the scent of rot, and crows circled above like carrion blades, waiting for the last heartbeat to fade. Lord Cedric von Halbrecht led the column of riders, his eyes grim beneath his fur-lined helm. To his right rode Amara, his sister, robed in white with a golden circlet on her brow, the mark of a light magister. Her presence was a beacon amid the encroaching gloom, a flickering candle held against the winds of chaos. And behind them, silent as smoke, rode Calen. He was wrapped in a black cloak, face shadowed by the hood. His expression was unreadable, his blade sheathed but ever near. He rode a step behind Cedric, always watching, always calculating. They had left Altdorf at first light with 12 halberdiers and 3 scouts. Their destination, an ancient ruin marked on no official map, Valgorath, a forgotten fortress buried in the heart of the Drawald, whispered of only in the dying breaths of a captured cultist. It was said to be a hidden staging post for the Druchii, used for decades to store weapons, relics, and information. Feuerstahl had demanded Cedric report back before the week's end. But Cedric had left without notice, with only his sister and Calen beside him. No one else could be trusted. And part of him, perhaps the foolish, aching part, hoped this journey would be the last test of Calen's loyalty. It would not go as he hoped. The deeper they rode, the more the forest changed. What began as thick woodland turned feral. Trees grew unnaturally close, gnarled limbs twisted together like dead hands. The light dimmed, swallowed by dense canopies, and the air itself grew heavier, like every breath was filtered through decay. The soldiers grew nervous. One slipped and fell while fetching water from a stream choked with crimson moss. Another, a scout named Eric, vanished during a routine sweep. They found his body strung from a tree the next morning, gutted and hanging by his own entrails, sigils carved into his cheeks in an angular alien script. Amara performed rites of purification. Cedric ordered a tighter formation. Calen said nothing, but when no one was watching, he doubled back, slipping into the trees like a whisper. He found the half-dissolved remnants of an old path, a sigil carved in a rock so subtly worn it would only be noticed by one who already knew where to look. He left a marker, invisible to human eyes, soaked in a blend of crushed roots and blood, a Druchii scent glyph. A signal. "We are here." And then he returned before the patrol noticed he was gone. By the third day, 2 more men were dead. One was dragged screaming into the trees at dusk. The others found only the pieces, his legs jammed into a hollow log, his torso displayed across a stump, like a sacrificial offering. His head was never recovered. Calen offered a theory. Beastmen, a small war band. Cedric nodded grimly, but Amara's brow furrowed. She could feel the magic, the taint of sorcery clinging to the earth like smoke after fire. "No beastman did this," she said. "Something older, something crueler." They made camp that night near the crumbling stones of an old watchtower, imperial architecture long devoured by moss and root. Cedric ordered a perimeter set. Fires were lit, tents pitched, blades unsheathed and kept within reach. Calen helped prepare the rations. He added a pinch of blackroot to one of the kettles, enough to cause sleeplessness and confusion, but not death. A precaution, should the time come. That night, Cedric dreamt of screams. The final stretch of forest narrowed into a gully carved by centuries of runoff. As the group passed through, the shadows closed in. Calen slowed his horse, subtly flicking his fingers beneath the saddle. A faint clicking. A small pouch fell from the girth strap into the underbrush, its contents ground glass, iron shavings, and a sliver of obsidian, a ritual bait designed to draw the attention of sentries hiding in the veil between worlds. It was time. Half-hour later, as they reached the edge of a clearing, the ambush was sprung. The trees exploded in motion. Dark shapes leapt from the branches, black armored figures with pallid faces, their eyes cold as dead stars. They moved like shadows, blades catching only the glint of firelight as they fell upon the halberdiers. The first soldier's head was gone before he could scream. A second fell backwards, throat split from ear to ear, blood spraying across the bark like a painter's flourish. Steel clanged, horses screamed, arrows hissed through the air, black-fletched and poisoned. Cedric drew his sword and roared orders, rallying the men into a defensive ring. Amara raised her staff, and golden light blazed forth, blinding the nearest attackers, searing through the mist like a star. Kalen moved with precision, killing one of the attackers in a blur of steel, driving his saber through the elf's abdomen and twisting until the spine cracked. Another he felled with a thrown dagger to the throat. He fought just hard enough to be believed, just bloodied enough to remain blameless. But in the chaos he reached into the cloak of a fallen Drutii warrior and retrieved a small bundle, a scroll case wrapped in black leather, the lexicon's sister volume. He tucked it into his belt, hidden beneath his tunic. When it was over, only 5 soldiers remained. The Druki had retreated, 2 dead, 1 wounded and dragged into the woods with shrieking laughter. The air still reeked of iron and burnt flesh. One of the wounded men begged for water. Another gurgled his last breath into the mud. Amara knelt by a corpse, her hands trembling. Cedric stood over the clearing, chest heaving, staring at the blood on his sword. Kalen sat silently nearby, cleaning his blade, his eyes catching the firelight but giving nothing in return. They had found the hideout's perimeter. The ruins of Valgorath lay just beyond. But something in Cedric had shifted. Too many coincidences. Too many vanished scouts. Too clean a disappearance. And Kalen, always there, always alive, always just out of reach. He watched his old friend from across the campfire, and for the first time he did not feel safer because Kalen was near. He felt hunted. Chapter 8. Revelations in the Ruins. The forest broke open with a sigh, like a wound splitting beneath pressure, and the ruins of Valgorath rose from the earth like the bones of a long-dead god. What remained of the ancient imperial outpost was little more than shattered towers, jagged walls drowned in vines, and a crumbling gatehouse veiled in mist. Centuries of decay had warped the stone, and the sigils once carved by proud architects of the empire were now worn down to little more than blasphemous scratches, desecrated by time and something far older. Twisted banners, stitched with foreign angular glyphs, hung from the tallest spires, fluttering soundlessly in air that did not move. Cedric stood at the head of the broken causeway, his sword drawn. Around him the remaining halberdiers moved with visible unease, their eyes flickering from shadow to shadow. The silence here was unnatural. Even the wind had stopped whispering. Amara dismounted beside him, her boots sinking into the moss-choked gravel. "This place," she whispered, her voice tight with nausea. "It's been defiled. The weave is poisoned here. Everything is wrong." Cedric nodded. He could feel it too, the sense of watching eyes, of secrets buried in the stone, the sensation that even the dead, long forgotten beneath these ruins, were holding their breath. Kalen stood a step behind them, gaze fixed on the blackened keep at the heart of the fortress. He knew what lay within. The scouting was brief. Most of the ruin was impassable, collapsed chambers and corridors overgrown with roots, black fungi clinging to stone like rotting skin. But the keep stood intact, its arched doorway wide open like a waiting mouth. They entered with blades drawn and torches raised. Inside, it was not empty. What had once been a hall of command, complete with vaulted ceiling, marble floor, and the imperial sunburst carved into the far wall, had been transformed. Now, it was a shrine of shadow. Columns dripped with black wax from twisted candles. Long tapestries of flayed skin, tanned and marked with runes, hung like courtly banners. Chains dangled from the rafters, many still crusted with dried blood. At the far end, where once a statue of Sigmar had stood in triumph, there was now a sculpture of knives, dozens of blades, curved and cruel, woven into the form of a winged serpent, whose eyes were sapphire and onyx. Cedric felt his stomach churn. This was ours. Kalen said nothing. Amara stepped closer to the walls, touching the air as if feeling ripples on the surface of a poisoned pond. They've used this place for rituals, interrogations, sacrifices. Cedric's jaw tightened. We burn it to the ground, all of it. Kalen stepped forward suddenly. Let me go first, he said, voice calm, controlled. We don't know how many are inside. Let me scout ahead. Cedric hesitated, then nodded. Kalen vanished into the corridor behind the altar of knives. He moved quickly, confidently through the side halls of Valgoreth. The scent of death no longer stirred revulsion. It was familiar, expected. Home. He reached the inner sanctum without effort. The chamber was lit by sapphire lanterns glowing with captured soul flame. Carvings in the walls depicted scenes of torment. Elves crucified on flaming trees. Human cities swallowed by shadow. Beasts with mirrored faces devouring their own children. And in the center, seated on a throne of blackened bone, was Valkar Nightsaw. He was draped in robes of midnight silk, his armor elegant and cruel, forged from dark steel and etched with runes that wept shadow. His face was as timeless and terrible as a blade unsheathed, a high-caste Druki, flawless and ancient, with eyes like pools of still water reflecting fire. Kalen knelt before him, pressing a fist to his chest. Valkar. The ancient elf rose with the slow grace of a predator. Kalen, or do you still use that foolish name? You return at last. I bring the lexicon. The ember sigil is secured, and the Halbrecht heir is compromised. Valkar's lips curled into a smile, thin and elegant. You've done well. You are near the end of your purpose. Kalen's expression faltered for a fraction of a second. The time is almost upon us, Valkaf continued. The Empire rots from within. The witch hunter's eyes are closed to the true rot. The Halbrecht girl is a candle in a windstorm. And the boy, he leaned forward, he still believes you his brother. A flicker of emotion passed across Kalen's face. He was, once. Valkar's smile sharpened. Then burn the memory. You were not made for affection. You were made for silence and blood. Kalen straightened. And what of the ruin? The humans will destroy it. Valkar turned toward the far wall. A panel shifted. A hidden vault opened, filled with glowing glyphstones and vials of screaming mist. They will try, he said, but they will die screaming. What they didn't know was that Cedric had followed. He had grown suspicious when Kalen had insisted on going ahead. Too many times. Too many disappearances. Too many convenient wounds and evasive answers. He had followed the torchlight's echo, slipped through the hidden corridors, and now stood behind a lattice of bone and chain, peering into the sanctum. And what he saw unmade him. Kalen. His Kalen, kneeling before a creature of darkness, speaking Druki, delivering relics stolen from the Empire, pledging loyalty to the slaughterers of Oberlens, the betrayer of Mates. the hand behind so many disappearances. The shadow dwarf. His knees nearly gave out. His hand clutched the stone wall, breath ragged. Rage and sorrow warred within his chest, a storm of grief too vast to speak. He turned to leave and kicked a fragment of bone. The sound echoed like thunder. Kaelin's head snapped toward the lattice. Cedric? But the young noble was already running, heart breaking in his chest, sword in hand, betrayal burning behind his eyes. The shadows howled in pursuit. Chapter 9. Blades Drawn. Cedric ran through the ruin with the breath of betrayal burning in his throat. The twisted corridors of Valgorath seemed to warp around him, stone growing closer, darker, colder with every step. The torches guttered behind stained iron sconces, their blue flames casting ghastly shadows on walls that still bled from ancient wounds. Blood dripped from the cracks between bricks, or perhaps it was water, he couldn't tell. His vision was blurred, his pulse thundered like a war drum in his ears. Every footstep was heavier than the last, as if grief itself were shackled to his boots. He emerged into the desecrated chapel again, blade drawn, chest heaving. Amara stood there, already in a warding stance, her staff pulsing with golden light. The surviving guards were forming a perimeter at the shattered windows. "What happened?" she asked sharply. Cedric didn't answer. He turned, eyes wild, scanning the shadows. "He's here!" And then Kaelin stepped into the light. He emerged from the archway, opposite Cedric, no longer masked in secrecy. His hood was thrown back, revealing his face, not twisted by malice or draped in deceit, but solemn, wounded, and unbearably human. His black hair clung to his brow with sweat, and blood seeped from a gash across his jaw. But his eyes, those unnatural violet eyes, were unmistakably Drukei now, no longer muted, no longer masked. Amara recoiled instinctively. "Kaelin!" He said nothing. "Draw your blade," Cedric said, his voice shaking. Kaelin looked at him, his expression unreadable. "You followed me. You kneel to monsters," Cedric hissed. "I watched you, heard you. You served Valkar. You handed him relics, imperial relics. I saw you." "I didn't lie," Kaelin said quietly. "I never lied. I just didn't tell you the truth." Cedric's blade rose. "Tell me now. Tell me why I shouldn't run you through where you stand." The air between them thickened. Kaelin sighed, slow and weary, and finally drew his saber. But he didn't raise it. "I was taken from the Empire when I was a child," Kaelin said, "raised in Nagaroth. They broke me, trained me, made me into a ghost. And then they sent me back here to infiltrate, to blend, to learn. I was supposed to spy, sabotage, kill." He looked directly at Cedric. "But then I met you." The pain in Cedric's eyes deepened. "So I was your mask. A tool." "No." Kaelin stepped forward slowly. "You were the first real thing I ever had. The first moment I doubted what I was made to be. And yet you murdered Matnus. You led us into that ambush. You left Eric to die." Kaelin's jaw tightened. Matnus was selling Empire secrets to Slaanesh cults. He had a list of children for ritual sacrifice. I killed him, because no one else would. His eyes flicked to Amara. The ambush, yes, that was mine, but not for slaughter. It was to retrieve the sister volume. Valkar would have sent someone worse. More bodies would have been piled high. Amara's staff crackled. "You're trying to justify it." "I'm trying to make you understand," Kaelin snapped. "I've done things I'll never forgive myself for. I've drowned men in boiling wax. I've flayed nobles alive because Valkar ordered it. I was a blade without will." He looked to Cedric again. "That you gave me a choice." For a long, painful heartbeat, neither moved. Then Cedric said, barely audible, "Then choose now." The tension fractured. With a snarl of agony, rage, sorrow, guilt, Cedric lunged. Their blades met with a shriek of steel. Sparks flew. The clash echoed through the ruins like thunder. Cedric fought like a man possessed, his style brutal, heavy, driven by grief. Kalen countered with precision, deflecting, redirecting, never striking to kill. He was holding back, every parry a protest, every dodge a plea. Amara stepped back, staff raised, torn between intervening and bearing witness. "You should have told me," Cedric roared, slashing downward. Kalen ducked, caught his wrist and twisted it, but didn't break it. "Put? You would have hated me," Kalen shouted back. "You do?" Cedric broke free and slammed a fist into Kalen's side. Kalen grunted, staggered, but retaliated with a low sweep that knocked Cedric's legs out from under him. The sword fell from Cedric's hand. Kalen kicked it away. Cedric scrambled to his knees. "Do it," he spat. "Kill me. That's what Valkar would want." Kalen stood over him, blade shaking in his grip. "I won't," he whispered. "Because you can't," Cedric snarled. Kalen knelt beside him, pulled something from his cloak, a pendant, small, worn, shaped like the twin-tailed comet. "Because I won't." He pressed it into Cedric's palm. "I kept this, even when it was forbidden, even when Valkar tortured me for it. It reminded me of who I could have been." Then he rose. "Tell Amara the relic is hidden in the vault beneath the altar. Destroy it. Burn this place to the ground." "Where will you go?" Amara asked, stunned. Kalen looked back one last time. "To kill Valkar. Alone. Before he can unleash what lies beneath these stones." Cedric's voice cracked. "Kalen?" But Kalen was already moving. Back into the black. Back into the jaws of the ruin. And Cedric, still kneeling in the blood-streaked dust, could only watch him go. Tears blurred his vision. For the first time in his life, he didn't know if he'd lost a friend or a brother. Chapter 10. Council of War. Altdorf welcomed them back not with cheers, but with silence. The city's great gates groaned open under gray skies, the Reik River swollen and sluggish beside the stone causeway. Rain drizzled like ash from the heavens, soaking banners that hung limp over the ramparts. Soldiers lined the walls in full armor, halberds in hand, not to salute, but to guard. They'd been expected. Cedric von Halbrecht rode through the city with blood crusted in the joints of his armor and mud caked to his boots. Amara rode beside him, her robes tattered and marked with soot, her face pale from overexertion. Behind them, only 3 soldiers remained from the dozen they had taken into the Drawald. One was missing an eye. Another coughed with every step. The third hadn't spoken since Valgorath. At the gates of the Celestial Bastion, they were met by a column of soldiers wearing the obsidian tabards of the Sigmarite Inquisition, their faces stern beneath polished helms. And at their center, arms folded, jaw clenched, waited Inquisitor Feuerstahl. "You disobeyed a direct order," he growled as Cedric dismounted. Cedric's eyes met his without flinching. "I found your ruin." Feuerstahl's gaze flickered just briefly before gesturing toward the inner doors. "Come, the council is waiting, and time is thinner than parchment." The solar chamber was a vault of marble, flame, and gold. High above, a massive oculus showed the storm clouds swirling over the capital, lightning arcing in slow spirals as if drawn by unseen hands. Beneath it stood a circular war table carved from stone taken from the ruins of Mordheim, a reminder that even greatness could fall into madness. Around the table stood the Empire's finest. Lord Warrior Genius Halbrecht of the Reiksguard, his cuirass stained from the last Orc siege. Magister Saria of the Light College, her eyes rimmed with silver. The dwarven emissary Gromley Ironfist, arms crossed beneath his braided beard. A handful of elector counts, their expressions veiled behind politics. And near the head of the table stood Fierstall, the witch-hunter's ledger, resting beside his gauntleted hand like a waiting executioner's axe. They turned as Cedric entered. "You've returned," General Halbrecht said, "against our projections." "We encountered resistance," Amara replied, her voice like ice. "But the ruin exists. Valgaroth is real, and worse than we feared." Saria leaned forward. "Druki?" Amara nodded. "Fully embedded. The ruin has been defiled into a shrine of their making. Ritual circles, captured souls. The weave was torn. There are things inside that should not be." Feuerstahl opened his ledger and turned it to a blood-marked page. "You claim to have seen Valkar Nightsong." "I saw him," Cedric confirmed. "He commands the operation directly." There was a ripple of unease around the room. Valkar Nightsong was not just a name. He was a myth, a shadow in noble histories, the Truchi's most prolific infiltrator, responsible for the assassinations of 2 high justiciars and a light college archmage. His name was used to frighten children and discipline spies. But he was real. And worse still, Cedric said, his voice lowering, he was not alone. He paused. "It was Kalen. His throat tightened. "My companion. He was Valkar's operative, the Shadow Wolf." Gasps, muttered curses. Iron Fist slammed a fist into the table, rattling the silverware. "Action. I knew there was something off about that bastard," growled one of the counts. Feuerstahl did not gloat. He merely nodded, then retrieved a scroll sealed in black wax. "That's why we've convened. The Emperor has sanctioned an autonomous hunting unit, one with the authority to root out and eliminate all Druchai agents within Imperial borders." He slid the scroll toward Cedric. "We want you to lead it." The room was silent again. Cedric stared at the seal. "You want me to hunt Kalen. He's compromised, dangerous, and in possession of information that could shatter the Empire," Feuerstahl said. "You're the only one who knows how he moves, how he thinks. You trained with him, slept near him, trusted him." Amara interjected, her voice sharp. "He spared us." Feuerstahl's reply was swift. "Which means he's weakening. That makes him unpredictable, and unpredictable means deadly." Cedric's hand hovered over the scroll. Images swam in his mind. Kalen kneeling before Valkar, Kalen hesitating to strike, Kalen whispering, "You gave me a choice." Was that a lie? A manipulation? Or was there still something in him that hadn't rotted? "I'll do it," Cedric said at last. Amara turned sharply. "Cedric!" He met her gaze, eyes dark. "If I don't, they'll send someone who won't hesitate, who won't remember the man who fought beside us in the Drawald. I owe him at least the truth before the end." Feuerstahl pushed a second scroll across the table. "Then take your first target. Kalen was last seen near Grunfeld's Hollow, near the Grey Mountains. There are rumors of disappearances, merchant caravans attacked without a trace. He's moving east." Cedric took the scroll, and with it, the weight of war. That night, as the city fell into another sleepless storm, Cedric stood alone on the tower of the bastion, the lightning painting the city in bones. Below him, the people of the Empire slept in ignorance. Above him, the clouds whispered in tongues older than man. And in his heart, war had already begun, not between nations, but between 2 men who had once been brothers. Now, only blades would speak the truth. Chapter 11. The Storm Breaks. The bells of Altdorf tolled like funeral drums, shaking the air with slow, heavy booms that rolled across rooftops and echoed down alleyways. From the tallest steeples to the lowest sewer mouths, the city listened, because when the bells rang in threes, it meant one thing: invasion. Inside the Bastion's war room, candles flickered violently in their sconces as cold winds burst through the opened windows. Outside, thunder rumbled, distant but relentless, like something ancient was awakening beneath the Reik. The storm clouds churned in unnatural spirals above the imperial capital, thick with the scent of ozone and blood. Cedric von Halbrecht stood at the center of it all, drenched in sweat despite the chill, reading the intercepted missive for the third time. His hands trembled as his eyes ran across the foreign script. Blood had stained the parchment, but the words were clear enough. The Black Ark's approach. 3 days' sail. Landfall near Reikhold. The Reik will run red with their coming. The seal on the scroll had been unmistakable. The coiled serpent of Valkar Nightsong, inked in a mixture of ash and crushed bone. Feuerstahl slammed his fist onto the table. Damn him! Damn all of them! The city isn't ready, Amara said, her voice low but sharp. We don't have enough soldiers to hold Reikhold, let alone repel an Ark assault. And if they use the river, they'll cut Altdorf's belly open from the inside, Cedric finished. He looked to the map pinned beneath daggers and tankards. They'll strike from below, not just ships. Saboteurs. Agents already here, like Kalen. The name lingered in the air like smoke. Amara flinched. Feuerstahl leaned over the map, pointing to the Reichshold crossing, a fortress where the Reich narrowed into a choke point west of Altdorf. If they control the river, they control trade, food, reinforcements. We'll be boxed in and the capital will fall within a week. Cedric gritted his teeth. Then we meet them at the river. By nightfall, the River Reik was a battlefield waiting to be painted. Reichshold Fortress, once a sleepy outpost surrounded by mist-shrouded docks and merchant shacks, now teemed with steel and fire. Imperial soldiers scrambled to man the walls. Ballistae were wheeled into position, and Sigmarite priests anointed the gates with holy oil. The air stank of fear and damp wood, and every creak of the river seemed to carry with it the whisper of oars and the promise of slaughter. Cedric rode along the ramparts barking orders, armor still dented from Val Gorath. Rain battered the stone. Thunder cracked again, closer now. Below, the Reik churned like a dying beast, waves slapping against the moorings with unnatural violence. The water was black, oily, as if something foul had stirred its depths. And then they saw it. On the horizon, where river met fog, the silhouette of a black ark rose into view, colossal, jagged like the spine of a drowned god, its sails stitched from flayed skin and reinforced with bone. Dozens of smaller vessels flanked it, swift, dagger-shaped raiding skiffs, each carrying warriors cloaked in shadows and armor blacker than sin. "They're here," whispered a soldier. "Form the line," Cedric roared. "Archers to the towers, cannons loaded. If they step on this shore, make them choke on their own blood." Lightning split the sky, and the first volley struck. The Black Ark opened fire with bolt throwers larger than siege towers. A harpoon the size of a cart slammed into the Reichshold gatehouse, shattering wood and sending bodies hurtling into the air. Screams followed. Arrows hissed from the walls, but most fell harmlessly into the river or bounced from the Drukei's dark-forged shields. The raiding skiffs slammed into the docks moments later, and the dark elves poured forth, tall, graceful, terrible. They moved like dancers in a storm, blades flashing like lightning, eyes alight with cruel ecstasy. A Reiksguard trooper stepped forward to engage one. He didn't make it 2 steps. The elf's twin blades scissored through his chest, splitting mail and bone. Blood sprayed across the cobblestones. The trooper collapsed in 2 halves, twitching. Another soldier screamed as a hooked spear dragged him from the walls into the river, where something beneath thrashed and pulled him under. Cedric fought his way to the lower courtyard, cutting down a Druchii assassin mid-leap. The elf's body convulsed, spasming on the ground, the lips still curled in a smile, even in death. Cedric turned to face a second attacker, barely blocking a downward strike that cracked his bracer. "Fall back," he roared. "Hold the inner gate." Amara appeared beside him, golden light radiating from her staff. She whispered a sigil and released a blinding burst of magic that sent 5 elves crashing into the river. Another tried to flank her, but a guard intercepted the strike and was run through for the effort. Blood drenched the courtyard. They were losing. And then Kalen appeared. He moved through the battlefield like a specter, face half-masked, drenched in shadow. He fought neither side. His blade struck down an Imperial archer, then turned and gutted a dark elf corsair. He was the storm within the storm, and no one could tell whose banner he bore. But Cedric saw him. Through the blood and fire, through the chaos and screaming, Cedric locked eyes with Kalen for the first time since Val Gorath. Kalen's expression was unreadable, part rage, part grief, part something too complex for any name. Then he turned and slipped behind the lines, vanishing into the interior of Reiksholt. "No!" Cedric bellowed. "He's after the sluice gates. He's going to flood the inner quarters." He chased. The lower tunnels of the fortress were half flooded already, echoing with water and steel. Cedric's boots splashed through ankle-deep filth as he pursued the shadow ahead, sword drawn. The walls closed in, damp, claustrophobic, bleeding rust. He found Kalen at the final chamber, standing before a mechanism of brass and chain that controlled the inner floodgates of the Reik. One pull would drown half the fortress. Kalen looked back, hand on the lever. "I wasn't going to do it," he said. Cedric raised his blade. "You're not giving me a choice." "You never had one," Kalen replied, stepping away from the lever, drawing his own blade. "But I did." They clashed again, steel shrieking in tight quarters, sparks flying off stone. Cedric lunged. Kalen countered with a sweep that nearly disarmed him. Their blades met again, again, blows meant to kill, but never quite landing with the finality required. "I loved this empire," Kalen shouted, "and it never would have loved me back." "You lied to me," Cedric snarled. "You lied to everyone." "I tried to change." Kalen's saber drove Cedric back against the wall. "But you can't change what you were made for." A strike opened Cedric's cheek. He retaliated with a brutal pummel to Kalen's jaw. The elf staggered. "You made your choice," Cedric growled, sword raised for the killing blow. Kalen didn't raise his weapon. He just whispered, "I know." But before the strike could fall, a tremor rocked the chamber. Above them, the fortress shook. Screams echoed. The Black Ark had fired again. Stone cracked overhead, debris crashed between them. Kalen used the chaos, disappearing again, deeper into the tunnels. Cedric cursed and gave chase, but he was too late. Kalen was gone. Again. When dawn broke, the Reik ran red with blood and ash. The Black Ark had retreated, damaged, not defeated. The Empire had held. Barely. Reiksholt was in ruins, hundreds dead, bodies littered the riverbank. Cedric stood atop the shattered ramparts, blade blackened with soot and blood. He had stopped the flood, saved the fortress. But Kalen was still out there. And now the hunt would not be about loyalty or justice. It would be about finishing what Brotherhood had begun. Chapter 12. Blood on Reik's Waters. The River Reik boiled beneath a sky of fire. Ash fell like snow on the water's surface, turning the current into a roiling tide of soot and blood. The sun, half shrouded behind thick war smoke, cast the scene in an infernal orange haze. In every direction ships burned, some shattered and half-sunken, others locked together like beasts in a death embrace. The cries of the dying rang over the clash of steel and the roar of black powder cannons. From the deck of the Iron Wrath, Cedric von Halbrecht watched the scene unfold with cold determination, jaw clenched, knuckles white on the hilt of his longsword. His armor, now scorched and dented from weeks of warfare, had been blackened with pitch to hide him from the glint of Drukei archers. His helm bore the marks of 3 glancing blades, and the wolf sigil of his house was stained in enemy blood. Beside him, the halberdiers of the Reik's Edge, his elite boarding unit, prepared for what would likely be their final mission. "What? Eyes forward!" Cedric bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We make for the Ark." And there it was. Looming above them like a mountain of obsidian and iron, the black ark known as Solrind slid through the river like a floating citadel of death. Its hull bristled with siege weaponry, bolt throwers the size of buildings, flame belchers that spat gouts of green fire, and artillery tubes that screamed when they fired. The ship's upper levels were carved with blasphemous runes, each one throbbing with dark magic. Chains dangled from its lower decks, dragging captured ships, some still aflame like trophies. From its spires poured legions of Drukei, corsairs in jagged mail, sorceresses draped in skin veils, and monstrous constructs forged from blood and bone. Their battle cries were in a tongue that curdled sanity. Cedric gave the signal. The Iron Wrath's prows surged forward, ramming into the side of the black ark with a shattering crunch. Grappling hooks flew, ropes twisted taut, arrows filled the sky. And then they boarded. Steel met steel in a maelstrom of violence. The Reik's Edge climbed the hull like spiders, hacking at anything that moved. The deck of the ark was a charnel house, bodies already strewn across the planks, black blood mixing with red in sickening patterns. The wood beneath their boots was stained and screamed softly, the ship itself seemingly alive, hungry. Cedric led from the front. He drove his sword into the chest of a corsair, ripping it free just in time to parry a downward strike from a glaive-wielding champion. The champion hissed in fury. Cedric replied with a savage headbutt that cracked the Drukei's nose and sent him reeling into the path of a halberd's thrust. Nearby, Amara unleashed her wrath, golden flames surging from her staff, incinerating a pack of darkhounds mid-lunge. Her face was spattered with soot and blood, her white robes now a tapestry of ruin. But she stood unbroken. The Empire was winning ground, slowly, agonizingly, until the shadows shifted. A dozen Drukei fell back suddenly, parting like water. From the stairs of the upper deck a lone figure descended, his cloak flaring like wings in the wind. His face was bare, marked with a long scar down one cheek. His armor was sleek, carved with sigils that pulsed softly, and at his hip rested a twin-bladed saber, forged from soul steel. Kylan. Cedric froze. Everything else disappeared. Their eyes met, 2 storms colliding, and the world paused. "You came," Kylan said, voice calm above the chaos. "I knew you would." Cedric stepped forward. "You never left me a choice." "No," Kylan replied, drawing his blades. "I didn't." Then they charged. Their blades met with a sound like the cracking of the world's spine. Sparks flew. Cedric's strikes were heavier, fueled by fury and grief. Kylan's were faster, refined, elegant, precise. They moved across the deck in a deadly dance, cutting through soldiers who dared step too close. Every swing was a memory, every parry a betrayal relived. "You betrayed the Empire," Cedric roared, blocking a sweeping arc and responding with a brutal elbow to Kylan's ribs. "I betrayed Volkar," Kylan spat, spinning to slash across Cedric's shoulder. "And now I betrayed you." Cedric grunted, blood seeping into his armor. Then who the hell are you loyal to? Kalen didn't answer. Instead, he dropped into a low sweep, knocking Cedric to one knee. He raised his saber for the killing stroke, but hesitated. Cedric looked up, panting, defenseless. "Do it," he growled. "End this." Kalen's hand shook, but the blow never came. Scream tore through the air, Amara's voice calling Cedric's name. He turned as a Druchii sorceress unleashed a torrent of shadow magic, striking Amara across the chest. She flew backwards, crashing into the ark's mast with a sickening crunch. Cedric's heart stopped. Kalen's eyes widened. In that moment, Cedric's hand closed around a fallen dagger. He lunged. Kalen twisted just in time, the blade slicing across his ribs instead of his heart. They broke apart, gasping. Around them, the ark burned. Druchii were retreating. The ark was sinking, breached below the waterline by Reiksguard engineers who detonated charges deep in the hold. The ark moaned, splintered, and began to tilt. Cedric stumbled toward Amara, cradling her broken form. She coughed, blood bubbling at her lips, but she lived. Kalen backed away, blood dripping from his side. His eyes locked with Cedric's one last time. "I'm not done," he whispered. And then he turned, vanished into the smoke. Cedric held his sister as the ark began to die beneath them, and the Reik roared louder than ever. The river had drunk its fill of blood, but it would thirst again. Chapter 13. The Choice. Flames climbed the mast like shrieking serpents. The Black Ark's soul-rend was dying, its hull torn open by sabotage, its deck split by internal explosions, and its corrupted heart screaming with the agony of a collapsing enchantment. Shards of obsidian and cursed bone rained from above, embedding into wood and flesh alike. Sailcloth stitched from the skins of captives flapped in great smoldering sheets, curling into ash. The entire vessel tilted starboard, groaning like a wounded leviathan as the Reik poured through the shattered lower decks. Water sizzled on molten metal. Screams echoed from below, Druchii warriors and Reiksguard both, drowned or impaled in the chaos. Cannons detonated in chain succession, vomiting fire and steel into the twilight sky. And atop the highest deck, where once banners of cruelty had flown, two figures stood amid fire and ruin. Cedric von Halbrecht, armor scorched and slick with blood, raised his sword in trembling defiance. His cloak was gone, his pauldron shattered. Blood ran freely down his right arm, staining the hilt and his grip. Before him, Kalen, bare-chested now, wounds stitched by old scars and new, stood with both hands on his twin-bladed saber. His face was smeared with ash and blood, one eye half closed from swelling. His stance was low, predatory, calculating. Beneath them, the ark cracked apart in long, keening groans. "There's no more running," Cedric said through clenched teeth. The rain of ash turned his face into a mask of war. "No more lies." Kalen didn't move. "You came here knowing I'd kill you. I came here knowing I'd stop you." They lunged. Steel met steel with a force that shook the collapsing mast. Sparks leapt into the air. Cedric drove forward, hacking in brutal, overhand swings. Kalen ducked and weaved, parrying with the grace of a dancer, responding with slashes meant not to wound but to cripple, to disarm. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to end it. "Won't you kill me?" Cedric roared, blood flying from his lips as Kalen's blade sliced across his side. "Because I remember the boy who saved me," Kalen growled, thrusting back. "I remember the brother who taught me to laugh. I remember the man who burned my trust." Cedric's next swing caught Kalen's cheek. Bone cracked audibly. He reeled back, blood pouring down his jaw. Cedric followed with a forward thrust, but Kalen sidestepped, grabbed Cedric's wrist, and drove a knee into his stomach. Cedric doubled over, gasping. Galen grabbed him by the collar, forcing him upright. "I never wanted this," he hissed. "I wanted to serve the Empire. I tried to break free, but they own my soul, Cedric." Cedric spat blood into Kalen's face. "Then let me free it." He slashed upward, and Kalen blocked. Their swords locked, face to face, breath to breath. Fire burned all around them. Screams of dying men and beasts rose like a dirge. The ark leaned harder to its side, and distant horns wailed from retreating Drukei vessels. Kalen stared into Cedric's eyes, and saw something still shining in them. Even now, even after all the betrayal, the deaths, the ruin. Look. He broke the lock, twisted, disarmed Cedric with a sudden twist of his blade, and drove his saber up under Cedric's throat, and stopped. The blade's edge kissed flesh. Cedric froze. Every breath he took pressed skin against steel. Kalen trembled. His grip faltered. He pulled the blade back. Cedric fell to one knee, panting. "You spared me," he said, disbelief cracking his voice. Kalen turned away, voice a rasp. "Not out of mercy." He stepped toward the edge of the ship, now tilting further, a roaring wall of fire behind him, the River Reik below. Cedric stood. "Don't run, not again." "I'm not running," Kalen said without turning. "I'm making a choice." He turned, eyes full of fire and pain and something fragile. "I've seen what I've become, what they made me, but I won't give Valkar the satisfaction of breaking me completely." He took a step back toward the railing. "You hunt me now, Cedric, because it's the only way either of us can live with what I've done. But not here. Not like this. I want the end to mean something." "Kalen?" Kalen smiled, blood on his teeth. "Telemar." "The third relic is hidden beneath the vaults of Marienburg. It will tear open the sea if he finds it." Then he let himself fall, backwards, into the black waters of the Reik. But, consumed by smoke and fire, Cedric stood frozen at the edge of the deck as the ark finally split beneath him and the world was swallowed in flame. Chapter 14. Broken Bonds. The dungeons beneath the Bastion of Flame were older than the Empire itself. Carved into the very bones of the earth, the prison was a labyrinth of iron and stone, where screams went to die and torchlight dared not linger. The walls wept condensation, mingled with the blood of centuries. Rust ate at chains that had held rebels, witches, beast-men, and worse. The smell was an ancient rot, mildewed flesh and faded screams. And in the deepest cell, bound by manacles etched with binding runes of the College of Light, lay a traitor, once named Kalen. He had been found floating in the reeds of the Reik, days after the fall of the Black Ark Solrend, carried downstream like flotsam. His body was mangled, ribs shattered, one arm broken in two places, a deep gash across his thigh that oozed black, poisoned blood. How he had survived was a mystery. Perhaps it was magic, perhaps vengeance, perhaps punishment. When they dragged him from the river, the soldiers had spat on him, cursed him. A traitor, a killer, a monster wrapped in flesh. He hadn't resisted. He hadn't spoken. Now he hung in a cell no larger than a grave, suspended by his wrists, knees just brushing the slime-covered stone floor. His long hair hung in mats, caked in dried blood. Bruises bloomed across his body, old and new, layered like paint on canvas. His lip was split. His breath was a rasp. When the door opened, he did not raise his head, but he knew who it was. Cedric. The sound of his boots on stone was unmistakable, heavy, deliberate, echoing with a weight no armor could account for. The torchlight cast his shadow long across the cell wall. He stood at the threshold for a long moment. Stealing. Then, wordlessly, he stepped in, sword sheathed but hand resting on the hilt. Calen finally opened his good eye. "Did they send you to kill me, or to forgive me?" Cedric didn't answer. His face was carved in stone, lines of grief and fury etched deep. The collar of his cloak was soaked from rain. He had not removed his armor. There was blood on his knuckles. "Because if it's the second," Calen croaked, "you're too late." Cedric stepped closer. The torch in the wall sconce hissed in protest. "I gave them your location," he said quietly. "Told them you'd come back to the surface." Calen gave a weak smile. "Told you I would. Couldn't leave without saying goodbye." "Don't mock me." "I'm not," Calen murmured. "I just didn't expect you to still care." Cedric reached into his belt and drew something, not his sword, but a dagger. Short, efficient, the kind used for executions. He held it before him, point down, heavy, simple. "This is what they want," he said. "Feuerstahl, the council. They want me to end it, make it clean, make you disappear." Calen chuckled, then winced, his broken ribs shifting. Poetic. "You began this, you end it." Cedric stared at him for a long time, then slowly stepped forward. Calen didn't flinch. He met his eyes, those same blue eyes that once laughed under the sun, now rimmed with guilt and storm clouds. "Do it," Calen whispered. "I've earned this." Cedric raised the dagger. His hand shook. Images flashed. Drawald. The tournaments. The firelit nights where they trained under the stars. The way Calen had saved his life. The way he had betrayed it. The way he had always stood beside him, even when everything else fell away. Cedric's jaw clenched. His heart thundered. He drove the dagger down and slammed it into the stone inches from Calen's neck. Tiles screamed against rock. Calen's eyes widened. He didn't breathe. "I won't give them the satisfaction," Cedric said, voice breaking. "They want justice. I want answers." Calen swallowed. "And I want to believe there's still something left of you to save." For the first time in days, Calen's eyes filled with moisture. "I'm so tired, Cedric." "I know." Cedric turned to leave. At the door, he stopped. "You will be judged. You will answer for every name on the list, every life you took, but not like this, not chained, not forgotten." "And Valkar?" Cedric looked back, his expression cold. "I'll send him to hell before your trial begins." Then he stepped out into the corridor, the door slamming shut behind him. Calen was alone again. But this time, he wasn't abandoned. Chapter 15, The Hidden Blade. The gallows were set in the courtyard of the Sigmarite tribunal, framed by towering blackstone columns and banners that bore the twin-tailed comet, though today no banners fluttered. The wind was still. Even the crows had gone silent. A scaffold of crimson-stained oak rose from the courtyard's center, and upon it stood a hooded executioner flanked by 2 Templars in full plate, their weapons drawn and polished as if this were not a punishment, but a ceremony. The gathered crowd, soldiers, inquisitors, nobles, priests, stood packed behind iron gates, their breath fogging in the crisp dawn air. Some bore satisfaction on their faces, others curiosity. But most wore masks of grim approval. Today, the Empire would kill a traitor. Calen stood at the center of the scaffold, manacled in enchanted irons, his body still weakened from wounds not yet healed. His once flawless posture sagged beneath the weight of fatigue. His mouth was bloodied, his shoulders stitched but swollen. A gash split his brow, dried black now, just beneath his half-lidded eyes. Yet he stood tall, because he knew this was the end, or so they thought. Below, in the heart of the tribunal's gatehouse, Cedric von Halbrecht stood in a chamber lined with iron runes and watching mirrors. His armor was ceremonial today, burnished to a high gleam, the Halbrecht wolf on his chestplate crimson-edged. But he felt none of the weight of pride, only the chill of the choice he had made. In his hand he held a scroll bearing the high Sigmarite seal. It ordered execution by blade and flame. Final. Unquestionable. Next to it lay a false corpse, a likeness of Kalen, shaped with alchemy and glamour, indistinguishable to all but the light magisters who had crafted it. And in the corridor beyond, Kalen waited, cloaked in ashgree, his hair cut short, his wrists still raw from real manacles. Cedric approached him. "You leave tonight," he said. "The northern pass. There's a boat waiting in the shadows of the Reikwald cliffs. It will take you beyond Empire waters. After that, your life is your own." Kalen didn't look at him. "You'll be called a traitor," Cedric continued, voice quiet, brittle. "And you'll never set foot in the Empire again. If you do, I won't stop the next blade." "I understand," Kalen murmured. "Why do this?" Cedric hesitated. Then, simply, "Because even now, I believe there's more of you left than what they made you." Kalen nodded once, and Cedric walked away. Up above, the execution began. A crier read the list of crimes: espionage, murder, treason, dark allegiance, the Viper. Everyone, "At least we give it a shot." The crowd jeered, some cried for fire, others for the sword. And when the hooded figure was forced to kneel, the blade raised high and brought down in one swift, clean arc. The illusion bled just enough. A head fell. The crowd roared. Cedric watched from the parapet, his face unreadable. Behind his eyes, Kalen's voice echoed, "You saved me once. Don't let it be the last time." That night, Cedric stood alone on the cliffs outside Altdorf. He wore no armor, only a long coat tattered at the edges and his sword strapped across his back. Below him, the Reik flowed black and slow, whispering secrets to the reed. He looked east. Somewhere out there, Kalen was gone. Somewhere out there, a blade once hidden had been sheathed, not in justice, not in mercy, but in the hope that some things could still be unmade. He didn't know if it was the right choice. He only knew that killing Kalen would have been easier. And so Cedric turned back toward the city. The sky was bruised with dawn, the stars fading one by one. A new war would come. He could feel it in his bones. But today, he had spared a life. And maybe, just maybe, in doing so, he had saved his own.